Joining us right now is the Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs at the Treasury Department, Tony Sayegh. And Tony, it's always a pleasure to see you.
Great
Thanks
to see you,
very
Maria.
much for joining us. So, okay, of course, we are all waiting for this tax cut plan. We got the details now. Some in the media are referring to the overhaul helping the wealthiest. Mitch Rochelle just pointing out that's the headline in the New York Times. Why is that not the case, Tony?
Well, look, the centerpiece of this has always been middle-income tax relief. That's what you get when you collapse from 7 brackets down to 3. You also get it, as Dagan pointed out, with this 15% corporate rate where you have a lot of small businesses that are owner-operated by individuals benefiting from that type of lower rate. So they're going to have access to a lot more capital to reinvest and create more jobs. When you think about it, though, Maria, regardless of what the rate may be on the top bracket, you are largely eliminating most of the deductions that, frankly, everybody agrees benefit the wealthy. So when you have the fact that we're protecting the charitable deduction, we're protecting the mortgage interest and retirement savings, but everything else, as far as deductions are on the table, the net effect is it's not going to necessarily be a benefit to the rich and largely is going to be something that benefits the middle class. And nothing ever benefits the entire country more, and you have said this many times on your show, than economic growth. We have not had sustained economic growth in this country over 1.6, 1.8% since the financial crisis. That's why we have such a bad economic condition when it comes to wages and job creation. This is going to change when you have a plan that's pro-growth focused like we have with this tax reform.
In fact, Tony, we're on the doorstep of another GDP report where we're expecting the GDP to be under 1%, basically. But, you know, the Committee for a Responsible Budget today is talking about the cost of this, and, of course, that's the pushback you're going to get. They're estimating that this is going to cost anywhere from $3 to $7 trillion. So the question becomes, how do you pay for it? Do you pay for it all with that growth that you're expecting, or how?
Sorry. You know, Maria, we respectfully disagree. It's funny that they're scoring a plan that we have not put out the details on. We still understand this has to go through a legislative process that will include collaboration with Congress. We understand also the impact, the compounding power of economic growth. Sure, when you're at 1.6, 1.8, less than 1%, which is what you're reporting we might see this quarter, yeah, it's nearly impossible to think that growth could pay for it. But when you get to 3% growth, which is what the President and the Secretary have determined is our goal, and we can get to it with this plan, some have estimated that could create up to $2 trillion in revenue. And don't forget, there are a lot, and this is being missed, by the way, there are a lot of things in this that pay for the tax reform, which is largely what I mentioned when it comes to eliminating the deductions and loopholes, which has to be factored in as well.
It's a really good point, Dagan, because you are talking about a growth plan here.
Absolutely. And I said yesterday this wasn't tax reform. I'm going to take that back because the Trump administration actually wants to repeal state and local tax deductions.
A lot of deductions.
Right. And the fact that you're going after that, Tony, but it could raise $1 trillion over 10 years. But certainly people in high-tax states like New York, Connecticut, and California aren't going to like it. Democrat states, I might add. But I want to know, have you polled people in Congress to get a general sense of how many people, particularly in the Republican Party, are on board with this outline of a plan?
Well, listen, I'm a New Yorker about to argue against my own personal interest here. We firmly believe that it's not the role of the federal government to subsidize states, and that creates an unfairness across the country when you have that type of subsidy. We believe very strongly that Congress and the White House, the administration over here, are very aligned on a lot of these proposals. The details still have to be worked out. This will certainly be one of them. But we're very closely aligned on the broad principles and priorities, which is why I feel so confident about tax reform happening this year.
Mitch, how do you see it?
So, Tony, let's talk about the pass-through entities for a second. What's the likelihood of that playing out the way it's proposed?
Look, we feel very strongly that we have set the rate that the president campaigned on, by the way, and won largely on his economic policy of 15% that will go toward benefiting, as Dagan pointed out in her opening, the small business owner operators. Look, the message sent by this reform, Mitch, is if you're an entrepreneur thinking about starting a small business, do it. Your tax policy is going to support you. If you're an existing small business and you want to grow, do it, because this tax policy will support you. To Maria's point, if you're a corporation that's kept your profits offshore because of our uncompetitive corporate tax rate, reinvest it in America. We're going to give you that chance. So this is a very pro-growth, pro-business, and I would add job-stimulating tax reform bill.
So, Tony, we see that the border adjustment tax is not here. I'm wondering if you are able to put another revenue generator in another part of the economic story. I mean, let's talk about the trade story, the other big headline of the day. President Trump telling the leaders of Canada and Mexico that the U.S. will not pull out of NAFTA, quote, at this time. The calls came hours after administration officials reportedly said that the president was considering a draft executive order to do just that. Is the president leaving the door open to that negotiation, and what might that look like in terms of an import tax or a reciprocal tax, which, of course, is what the president spoke of, instead of a border adjustment tax?
Well, let me just say that when it comes to the border adjustment tax, in the way it was currently proposed from the Hill, we didn't think that necessarily worked. We've kept open, obviously, the opportunity to have dialogue on that and come up with something that may be part, to your point, Maria, of a trade type of deal. But we are very committed, by the way, and this is the important principle, whether it's NAFTA or pulling out of the TPP, which is what the president did very early in the administration, to creating a more fair and free and balanced trading system in the world, in which the United States does not necessarily get taken advantage of for the fact that we have the most open markets and among the biggest trading markets in the world, and we are going to make sure that we renegotiate deals to benefit the American worker, American companies, and American products. So this is definitely the philosophy that we strongly believe in.
You could look at this as deficit neutral as opposed to revenue neutral, because if you look at it deficit neutral, you can put a revenue raise somewhere else, not necessarily in the tax plan. Is that the plan?
Well, I think you're right to suggest that we firmly believe in dynamic scoring, which takes largely into account the benefits of growth. You know, people forget when money is being reinvested into our economy through the private sector, through individuals, that has a multiplier effect where the value is greater. And that is something we foresee when you have a pro-growth tax proposal, as we've put forward yesterday, where you're liberating tons of capital, whether it goes through businesses, whether it goes through the individual, small businesses, businesses of all sizes. We are liberating capital to be reinvested into the American economy, and that's going to have a profound impact, Maria, that does offset the costs of what sometimes tax cuts are scored as.
Yeah, really big stuff, Tony. Good to see you. Thanks so much for walking us through it.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate it. Tony Sayegh joining us there in Washington.